Hi, this is Jim Hewling, and it's a real pleasure to welcome you to this episode of Execution Insights. Now, today I want to talk about something that I believe we don't name often enough. I'm talking about the loneliness that quietly takes hold to those of us in leadership roles. And I believe it takes hold not because we're isolated by our position or our title or our circumstances. No, I believe it takes hold because somewhere along the way, the connections that once gave us energy start to fade. And if you've been a leader for very long, you probably felt this. You know that sense of holding space for everyone else and quietly wondering who's holding space for you. And if that sentence resonates, please know you're not failing as a leader. You're just human. In fact, loneliness in leadership, it's rarely dramatic. It's never loud. It's always quiet. And most of the time, it just looks like distance. It just looks like a person who's busy, moving from one meeting to the next without a single moment of real connection. And clearest of all, it looks like knowing more about someone's performance metrics than we do about who they are as a person. So here's something 40 years in leadership has taught me that's so important to understand. Loneliness is often the earliest warning sign of burnout. And it shows up long before we get to things like fatigue or frustration or even anger. It's that quiet whisper in your voice that says, hey, something in me seems like it's running low. And if we don't recognize that signal, you know what? It begins to kind of hollow us out from the inside. But there's good news too. Loneliness has an antidote, and that antidote is connection, not surface level or false, but real human connection. You know, not the kind we check off a list. Hey, I made two connections today. No, I mean the kind that we build through repeating genuine curiosity and simple, meaningful conversations. I think leaders begin to heal on the inside the moment they start knowing their people again on the outside. You know, knowing their stories, knowing about their families, knowing about their hopes, their ambitions, their dreams, understanding what motivates them. And here's the beautiful part of that. When you give that kind of connection to someone else, they give it back to you. And suddenly, what had become difficult becomes easy again. So here's a challenge for this week. Choose one or two, or maybe even three people, and create a moment where you ask them about something other than their performance at work. And then listen with your eyes and your heart and your whole body. Hear everything they have to say and be sure they feel heard. Because when we do that, our own sense of loneliness actually starts to fade. And that's also the moment when leadership becomes energizing again, when we think we're really doing something and making a difference. So I want to thank you for joining me today, and I hope you found this to be a valuable episode. And by the way, if you did, if it spoke to you, I hope you'll share it with someone else who might need it. We've never really seen a time where loneliness is a greater force than it seems to be today. So if you know someone who might be hearing the loneliness signal, just forward this email over to them and see if it doesn't make a difference. Hey, thanks for joining me. I hope to see you next time in the next episode of Execution Insights.